You open the app, you've done this before, maybe hundreds of times, maybe more than you'd like to admit. You swipe, you wait, maybe you match, maybe you don't, and somehow, the match that leads to nothing feels worse than not matching at all. And then, somewhere in the middle of all of it, a feeling starts to settle in. Quiet at first, then louder, like a conclusion your brain is drawing from the data. Something must be wrong with me. Not wrong with the app, not wrong with the system, not wrong with the architecture that was specifically designed to keep you swiping, not to help you connect with someone. Wrong with you. That conclusion feels personal. It feels like yours, but it isn't. It was built for you. And once you see exactly how it was constructed, you will never open that app the same way again. Let's start with something that might seem obvious but rarely gets examined closely enough. Rejection has always existed. It has always been part of looking for love. It has always hurt. That's not new. What's new, what's genuinely different about this era, is the context in which rejection happens, and how that context quietly converts a normal, painful human experience into something that feels like evidence of personal failure. Think about how romantic rejection used to work. You ask someone out. In person, they said no. It hurt, but you had context. You knew this person. You understood something about why it happened. You could attribute it to something: timing, circumstance, incompatibility, and eventually move on. Now think about the swipe. Someone looks at your photographs, the best photos you have, the ones you agonized over, for approximately 2 seconds. They swipe left. You never find out. You never get a reason. You never get context. You get a data point, not chosen, and then another, not chosen, and another, and another. Hundreds of silent verdicts accumulating in the background of your daily life, not as a story you can process, as a score. And your brain, which is exceptionally good at finding patterns, starts to extract a conclusion from that score. Not, this particular person wasn't interested. Something deeper, something quieter. I am not the kind of person people choose. That is not a natural result of rejection. That is what the architecture produces, and it was not an accident. But here's what most people never notice. The mechanism underneath doesn't start with the rejection. It starts long before that. It starts with the waiting. To understand this, you have to go back to one of the most foundational findings in behavioral psychology: variable ratio reinforcement. The same principle that makes gambling compulsive. A slot machine works on one core insight: unpredictable rewards are more addictive than predictable ones. If every pull gave you something, you'd stop when you had enough. If no pull ever gave you anything, you'd stop immediately. But if the reward comes sometimes, randomly, without pattern, you can't stop. Because the next one might be it. Every swipe is a pull on a slot machine. Sometimes you get a match, sometimes you don't. You never know which it will be. Your brain, specifically the dopamine system, responds not to the reward itself, but to the anticipation of the reward. That small flutter before the screen loads. That moment of pure possibility. Research confirms that this kind of intermittent reinforcement activates the same dopaminergic pathways linked to compulsive behavior. Not because the people using these apps are weak, because no human brain was designed to resist a loop like this. But here's where dating apps are more psychologically dangerous than slot machines. With a slot machine, you're trying to win money. You know the machine has no opinion of you. When it doesn't pay out, you don't wonder if the machine found something wrong with you. With a dating app, what you're trying to win is human desire, proof of desirability, the feeling of being chosen. These are not abstract rewards. These are needs wired into the deepest structures of human psychology. The need to belong, to be seen, to matter to someone. When the slot machine doesn't pay out, it's luck. When the app doesn't match you, your brain has a much harder time keeping it impersonal, because a person looked at your face and decided no. 100 people looked at your face and decided no. The dopamine loop keeps you coming back. But what you're coming back for, human approval, turns every loss into a quiet question about your worth. That's the first layer. There are two more. The second mechanism is more insidious, and it starts before you even open the app. Psychologists use the term self-objectification to describe what happens when a person begins to experience themselves primarily from the outside, not as a subject with an inner life, but as an object to be evaluated by others. Dating apps are self-objectification engines. They require you to construct yourself as a product for rapid visual evaluation. Select the photographs that best represent your physical appearance. Compress your personality into a few sentences. Build a version of yourself optimized for a 2-second judgment by a stranger. And the consequence, documented consistently across the research, is that you start to think about yourself the way the app thinks about you. You begin to experience your own appearance as something to be assessed and ranked. Users report spending significantly more time thinking about how they look on days they use dating apps. They scrutinize their own photos not for how they feel in them, but for how a stranger might receive them. They monitor themselves the way the app monitors them. And this self-monitoring, this constant comparison of your real self against the imagined standard of what gets matched, is one of the most reliable pathways to body dissatisfaction that psychology has ever documented. The app never tells you you're unattractive. It doesn't need to. It teaches you to evaluate yourself the way it evaluates you. And then it gives you thousands of data points suggesting you're not measuring up. The third mechanism is the one that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most quietly damaging of all. Psychologist Barry Schwartz spent decades studying what happens to human decision-making when choices multiply beyond a manageable number. His finding, now one of the most replicated in behavioral economics, is deeply counterintuitive. More choices don't make people happier. They make people more anxious, more dissatisfied, and more likely to regret whatever they choose. When the pool of options becomes effectively infinite, the brain cannot evaluate and settle. Instead, it keeps scanning, always aware that something better might be one more option away. The result isn't satisfaction. It's a persistent, low-grade restlessness, a feeling of being perpetually close, but not quite there. Dating apps don't offer 10 options, they offer millions. An infinite, always refreshing supply of potential partners. And this is presented as the product's greatest feature. But what the paradox of choice predicts, and what researchers now observe, is that infinite choice doesn't lead to better connections. It leads to compulsive scanning and chronic dissatisfaction. You match with someone. They seem good, but the app is still there. What if the next one is better? What if you're settling? The architecture of endless options actively undermines the ability to invest in any single person, not because users are shallow, but because the human brain was never designed to evaluate an infinite pool and feel at peace with its choice. And here's the darker dimension of this. When you are one among millions of options, when you know, on some level, that you are also scrollable, also replaceable, also one more face in an infinite feed, it changes how you experience yourself, not as a person, as a product, competing in a market where supply always exceeds demand. The app doesn't say this out loud, but the logic seeps in. Didn't match? Optimize the product. Better photos. Sharper bio. Improve your metrics. The language of self-improvement becomes indistinguishable from the language of product optimization. And somewhere in that translation, the person inside the profile gets lost. Now slow down for a moment, because this is where it's worth sitting with what's actually happening. 3 mechanisms, running simultaneously, invisibly, every time the app is open. The dopamine loop that keeps you returning. The evaluative framework that teaches you to see yourself as a product. The infinite supply that makes you feel replaceable. None of them announce themselves. None of them feel like psychology. They feel like you. Like your moods, your self-doubt, your quiet sense that you're somehow not enough. That feeling that something must be wrong with me is the output of a system. It is not a verdict on who you are. It is what 3 specific mechanisms produce when they run long enough. There's something worth understanding about why these mechanisms were built this way. Dating apps are not in the business of helping you find a relationship. They are in the business of keeping you on the app. These are different businesses. In many cases, they are directly conflicting ones. A user who finds a relationship and leaves is a lost customer. A user who stays, who keeps returning, keeps paying for premium features, keeps swiping, is the business model working as intended. The feeling of being almost there, content enough to stay, disappointed enough to keep trying, is not a side effect. It is the architecture of engagement. You are not the customer. You are the inventory. Understanding the mechanism is not the same as being free of it immediately, but something shifts when you can see it clearly. When that hollow feeling settles in after an hour on the app, there's a question worth asking. What produced this? Was it evidence about who I am? Or was it the output of a system specifically designed to generate this exact feeling in this exact way? A left swipe contains 0 information about your worth. Your brain was built to make it feel like everything. Those are not the same thing. The architecture was always building toward one conclusion, that something is wrong with you, that the problem is you. It isn't. The problem was always the architecture, and now you can see it.